any ornamentation on your building? I love his response. He said, I did. I covered my building in a bunch of mirrors so that all the surrounding buildings would become my building's ornamentation. And you can actually see the ornamentation of Gateway 3 reflected on the Gateway 4, so he succeeded in that. And now, folks, I would be remiss if I did not say, look up right now to the left. There she is, big strong girl. That's the tallest building in Chicago. It's the Willis Tower. Now do not worry, I'm going to talk about this building's details a lot, but it's after we're turned around, going back down this side of the river. The next building I'm talking about, though, is ahead of us. On the left, this black box building with a big gray slab on the side of it. Now, the designer of this building really wanted to get his building on the map, but how is he going to do it? Well, I'll tell you, he was going to put a map on his building. This is the world's largest "You Are Here" sign. That wide, light gray strip on the right, that's the south branch of the river. Towards the bottom, then you carry your eyes up to the center of the building. You see that little red plug? That is where we are. That is our boat. Then it continues on to the junction of the river where we just were, where the river splits. And that is how we got his building on the map, put a map on his building. Now, change of subject, something very near and dear to my heart. Movies. I love movies. A lot of great movies have been shot in Chicago. The Blues Brothers, Ferris Bueller's Day Off was shot, and also Home Alone, shot in a suburb here called Winnetka. You can actually drive by that house if you want to see it. But my favorite Chicago shot film has nothing to do with this. It doesn't even take place in Chicago. The movie I'm talking about takes place in Gotham City. Raise your hands, anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah, 2008, Christopher Nolan Batman film The Dark Knight. Now the opening scene is a bank robbery involving the Joker. That was filmed right there on the corner of this building. You can actually see the hanging lights on the inside, and if you've seen that movie as much as I have, you will recognize them. That is the First National Bank of Gotham. But actually, this giant building is the old post office building for the city of Chicago. Now, it's no longer used as a post office. You can see the companies that share the building on the outside of those signs there. But to talk about why this post office was so big, the reason this post office was so big was because this was the post office when Chicago was the catalog capital of the world. So a massive catalog operation reliant on the mail-in turn, of course, is going to get you a massive mail operation. But whenever those catalog companies lost relevancy, moved out of the city, the Postal Service put this building up for sale, where it was almost immediately purchased by a British land developer with the last name of Davies. Now, Mr. Davies, he held on to the building for many, many, many years, but kept it empty. But the weird thing is, he constantly entertained offers on the building. He would talk with people, talk to them on the phone, meet with people, have lunches, talk to them about selling, never sell. This really annoyed the city of Chicago because you may notice we just went underneath the highway. That highway goes through the post office, it always has, so the city of Chicago told Mr. Davies, if you do not sell this building and it starts crumbling on top of our highway, we are declaring eminent domain and taking the building from you. Mr. Davies sells immediately for $175 million. Now, I do not know where the lesson is in this story, but I have to believe that there is one, because the day after Mr. Davies made that $175 million sale, Mr. Davies died. I know it's very shocking into the story, but do not worry, folks, it gets worse. The reason they say he constantly entertained offers on the building was he had no friends, no next of kin. He was lonely, and that was his chance to talk to someone. That is a very unfortunately true story. I have no positive spin on that, but it's a great example of a lot of stories in history. Sometimes they're just going to be a bummer. Now, the Postal Service, though, very creative. It's where they put the new post office headquarters in Chicago. It's right there. It's right next door. Now, this post office has a beautifully designed lobby. It's almost like a ballroom. When asked why they made the lobby so nice, the architect had an answer. He said post offices in the United States often work on a deficit. So I want them to be able to rent that space out for, I quote, weddings and bar mitzvahs. Because if you have ever planned your dream wedding, what are the two words that keep popping into your head? Post office. Anybody want to guess how many times that's been used for an event space? Yes, none. Goose egg, zero. No many times. I will tell you, though, it's used every day as a post office. You can go there as long as it's not a post office holiday. Now, going back to an architect I've already talked about today, Bertrand Goldberg. Now, Bertrand Goldberg, he's the one that designed the Corn Cob buildings in Chicago. He's got another building on the tour. Could y'all point to it if you've noticed it? Yes, it's ahead of us. On the left, this Jetsons-looking building. Now, a big thing you might notice about Bertrand Goldberg's buildings is they're weird looking. Why do they look like that? Well, I do have an answer. Bertrand Goldberg's philosophy in architecture was that there are no right angles in nature, so there should not be any right angles in architecture, explaining the out-of-rounded shape of his buildings. Now, another interesting thing about Bertrand Goldberg's career is that he was a major trendsetter when it came to residential buildings in Chicago. The Corn Cobs, those are the first residential buildings built downtown. That's why they were building a city inside of a city. this one here was the first residential tower built in the South Loop. That is why this was also built like a city inside of a city. It's called River City, and there are still a few active components of that city inside of a city lifestyle. The first floor there, if you're peeking on the inside, you can actually probably tell what that is. It's still in operation daycare. And then on the opposite side of those bubbly windows that we passed, there's the indoor park, because nothing says the great outdoors like the great indoors. Now, Bertrand Goldberg, whenever he first designed this building, he loved it so much, he lived inside of it in the 1980s. Now, on the right-hand side, the furthest thing that you can see on the right is a skinny radio tower. It's almost flush with the pilot house right now, almost flush with my body, and it's past this parking garage. It says Marshalls on the corner. That is it's also the tallest thing you can probably see on the right-hand side. Can everyone see that radio tower? I want to make sure everybody can see that. Now, the reason I'm being so intense about everybody seeing that right now is because that radio tower, once again, it's directly beside us. That radio tower is sitting on the site of the O'Leary's barn. That is where the Chicago fire started. Now, to put the damage of the fire into perspective, everything we have seen up until this point would have been gone. Just a pile of smoking ash. Now, the reason that radio tower is there today, if I can be honest, it's kind of funny. That is actually the main firefighter training facility for the city of Chicago. That is where we get all of our firefighters, Chicagoans being the ever lovers of irony and a little bit of dark humor. That is where the Chicago fire started, destroyed over half the city. Now, the next building I'm talking about on the right-hand side is the only building on the right-hand side. Now, I mentioned with the Tribune building. Then I'll tell you guys what the building in Chicago that's the highest risk for getting demolished. That would be this one. Now, the reason this building is at such a high risk for getting torn down is because it's the old coal power plant for the Union train station. And one, it's in a bad location, so if you wanted to build like a restaurant or a brewery there, couldn't do that. You'd have to build an access road to it. But the main reason being, they burned coal in this building for many, many, many years. When you do that, it essentially destroys the guts of the building, covering them in coal dust. Coal dust is bad news. It is carcinogenic, it is radioactive, it can cause cancer, so it is a lot more expensive to redesign the building and cleaning it up instead of just knocking it down and building up something new there. And now, folks, let's get back into some history. So after the